Hey guys, it is Cole Patterson, and last we left off, we were finishing up our basic tutorials by going over our essential windows. Now, if you'll excuse me, my voice isn't quite back. I'm still a bit under the weather, so hopefully that'll get better soon. Despite that though, we are still going to be going full force today into our gradient tool, which we can see here. It has the shortcut of G and is located here on the toolbar. It also has its own dedicated window to do more precise work with, if you're wanting to work with numbers a little more rather than visual based elements. But with that in mind, we're going to go ahead, take our selection tool and select the first square that I have prepared, and then move over to our gradient tool. Now, once we have that selected, we are going to select the first of our squares and get a nice basic linear gradient. And we're going to keep this one grayscale for now, just to keep things basic. Now, what we have here is a bar representing the gradient that we have placed on it. Over here we have a white and over here we have a black. And right here we have a little diamond which represents the midpoint between the two anchor points of color that we have on either side. Now, we can move all three of these along the slider as needed to change the movement of the gradient. You can see anything to the left of an outermost anchor point will remain consistent to the left or right of it respectively, and then we can move these to get more severe or less severe gradient effects on either side. Now, additional ways that we can move this is we can move the bar itself, we can increase or decrease the length of the bar, or we can rotate the bar. Now, to do the last of those things, you would either select the square itself or move just beyond the square until the cursor makes this little rotary look to it. Now, additional things that you can do are as follows. You can do this at either the window or on the bar itself. We can select a point on the map on this little bar here where the cursor has this little plus next to it, and create a new anchor point based off of the current color at the point where we're selecting, and then move it to have a little more control. And you'll notice that between all of our color anchor points, we have one of those little diamonds to control the midpoint between those two specific colors. Now, I would err a bit of caution in using them excessively, because the more you use, the more apparent the gradient becomes and the harder it is to make it look nice. So the same with anchor points. The fewer anchor points you have on a path, the fewer anchor points you have on a gradient, the better it will look in both cases. Now, another neat little trick that I'll show you just right quick is you can select a given gradient like this one here and remove it this way, or if you want to, you can simply slide it off. This only works on the square end, not the round end to my knowledge. Oh, I stand corrected. On either end of the bar. Now, one more thing we can do is we can double click these points, and again, you can do this on the bar itself or over here on the gradient window. I prefer working with the bar personally, and we can change the value of these to our liking with a little more specificity, if you will. Now, what you saw here is something a little more advanced that we're actually about to get into. We're going to go ahead and take our selection tool and apply a gradient here. Now, you'll see that the gradient from one carries over to some degree to the next item we select. It retains that memory, but what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go to our swatches, and we'll make this a color. And then we'll do the same here. We have cyan for the left, And then we'll take this nice kind of a cerulean blue here. Yeah, I've found that these two colors go together pretty nicely. Although what we will do is go and we will dial this back just a bit. There, I think that looks a lot nicer. Now, we aren't going to go through all that we did here so much. We're just showing that this can be used with color. And if we wanted to make something really insane, we can put a more unusual color, something more drastically different from a light blue to a dark blue in the middle, or just remove that altogether. And then suddenly we have kind of a cotton candy effect. And I've always found these look quite nice. They kind of give me a 90s aesthetic feel to it. I apologize. My roommate's in the other room. He got off of work. I don't have the heart to tell him to move. But yeah, quite simple. But the ability to use color as opposed to just grayscales opens up a lot of possibilities for what you can do with the gradient tool. Next up, we have this square, and what we're going to do is we're going to take our gradient tool, but instead of giving it a linear gradient, we're actually going to give it a radial gradient. And how this works is it creates a circular radial effect, if you will. Sorry, my words aren't with me right now. And what this allows us to do is create a gradient that goes outward from a midpoint of a circle to an outer edge. Now, the controls work very mostly the same in that you have your anchor points and that you can move them inward and outward as needed. And you can also change the length of the circle as needed. Make it a larger or a smaller circle depending on what your needs are. You can also rotate the circle. Now, you may be thinking, what's the point of rotating a circle if a circle is a circle? Circles have the same radius no matter where the endpoint on the circle is, and you would be right for thinking that. However, if you look here, we have this nice little black dot on our tool here that we can move, and this allows us to turn our circle into an ellipse. And suddenly, this begins to have a bit more characteristic that can be manipulated based off of rotation because of its imperfect nature. Now, it's fairly simple, but I find that you can do a lot with that small detail added to it. It's something to play around with. I fully condone experimenting with it on your own time. There's a lot you can do with it. The last thing that we're going to go over is this square, and you'll notice that it's different, and I have it different for a very particular reason. As opposed to having our fill selected, when we do this, we are going to have our stroke selected. And when we apply our gradient, we'll do it over here on the window. When we apply our gradient, you will see that it's applied only to the stroke. Now, this looks a bit excessive, we'll say. So we'll take this back to a cerulean like we originally had it, something about like that. And I personally think that something like this, very simple, very clean, it looks quite nice. Now again, that's just my opinion. I've had professors, I've had colleagues have differing opinions from me. I think that this looks quite well. You can also do a radial gradient if you so wish. The controls aren't quite as intuitive for that, but again, with stroke, you really don't need quite the level of control as you would with your fills. It looks quite nice. There's actually one more type of gradient, a freeform gradient, and it's relatively recent compared to the others. They finished it up, I believe, in the last 3 or 4 years, uh, and have since worked out a few of the kinks with it. But we will get into that in one of our advanced level tutorials because it's a bit more involved and has a bit more freedom to it. For now, I think that this covers all that you need to know about gradients getting started. Feel free to experiment, and I hope that you've learned something.